Now, Saoirse asks a very good question that the majority of you should ask. But the majority of you think you don't need to ask it, so you haven't asked it. But very simple question. Why am I unwilling to experiment to find out whether God exists? So why am I unwilling to experiment to find out whether God exists? Very good question. The majority of the planet, exactly the feeling that they have, not wanting to find out. So what I need to ask you, Saoirse, is a few questions relating to your family, all right? And in particular, how or what your family believes. So can you tell me what your family believes?
I come from a few generations of atheists.
All right, so you've had multi-generational atheists, so put that down. Now, of course, if somebody else could write down, I've got multi-generational Muslim or multi-generational Christian or multi-generational, couldn't they? It's like there are all these different multi-generational things. So it's very good that you've also written down or said multi-generational. So it's, okay, and because that actually does play a part in the feeling you have. So we'll talk about why in a minute. Yes, so what else? So how would they react if all of a sudden Saoirse believed in God? What would be their reaction as a guess? You know?
I've thought about it a lot, and
right.
I'm not exactly sure. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be positive. I actually had to tell my mum. Well, I didn't have to.
But you felt you'd had to. Yeah,
I did want to, even though I was terrified. Told my mum a couple of days ago
that you were coming here. Yeah, and she goes.
Yeah, I felt a lot of resistance and kind of fear in her and disbelief.
Yeah, okay. So if we can just write down some of those things in the family. So we've got disbelief in the family that you even experimenting with the concept, right? Fear, yep. And what was the third one you said? Disbelief, fear and resistance, yes. That's right. Yep. Okay. Okay, so here's Saoirse. Soul. Yeah. Let's do it more realistically. So I draw feminine half of the soul. Unless I'm mistaken. Please tell me if I'm mistaken. Okay, so we've got feminine half of the soul. You got you've got physical body, spirit body connected to this feminine half of the soul. So there's Saoirse. We'll just put that character is Saoirse. Okay, and what pressures has she got upon her before she even considers this question? So you can see you've got the family-based pressures projected at you. So this is a emotional pressure being projected at you straight away, right? That's not how you spell pressure. Yes, it is. Okay. So it looked wrong. I don't know why. So you've also got multi-generational pressures. Now every person who's ever died passes, and they carry on their current belief systems after they pass. So if you've had multi-generational atheists in your family, then it's highly likely that these particular people are still in spirit, are in spirit, and still projecting their beliefs at you. So now you've got some spirit-based pressure. So you've got, this is earth-based pressure, people on earth that are pressurising you, and then you've got spirit-based pressure on you as well. People who can actually just drop thoughts into your mind even without you seeing that they're there. Whereas here you've got to go and visit your mum and she drops those thoughts into your mind. Here these spirits can just drop those thoughts into your mind because you can't see them and fairly open to receiving from them. And the thought is basically that the atheist viewpoint is the truth as well, right? That's what they believe. All right, so now we've got a definition of truth that has entered you, right? And that the generational, from your family for generations have believed to be true. You've got those same generations who have passed who still believe the same thing, so they are putting that on you. And then you've got the feelings or pressures from your family on earth. Now, these pressures are going to be quite high, right? These family-based pressures are going to be quite high. Now, can you see already that Saussure, to even experiment with the concept that God exists, has to already take some risks that potentially might have quite bad outcomes, right? And yet, at this stage, there's not much feeling of the benefit of taking the risk. Do you follow? Because we've not yet had the relationship with God, and therefore not yet felt the benefit of a relationship. And yet all of these terrible risks are facing me before I even can engage the experiment. Does that make sense? And this is why it's hard for you to engage the experiment. If you imagine for a moment that you felt quite confident that you weren't going to get any family pressure, and you felt quite confident that the spirits around you wouldn't, disagree with you all the time, and also you felt that while you might believe that, in the atheist belief, that it's an option that you could give it up or change your viewpoint depending on what truth you discover, then you could see that engaging the experiment would be probably quite easy. But because of these external pressures, it's going to be quite hard. And this is and the reason why I wanted to raise it, not just with you, but with many of the others, is that we don't realise that a lot of our decisions are actually condemned before we even begin the experiment. It's almost like we're not allowed to make a mistake, because if we make a mistake, we're just going to get hammered before we begin. Right? And this is a major problem with learning. The problem, if you put a child in an environment where it's going to get hammered if it believes a certain thing, it's highly likely that child will not believe that thing, just in order to get acceptance from its surrounds. So, Saussure, obviously it's going to mean dealing with a few emotions before you begin the experiment. And that's quite hard, actually, because to deal with those emotions requires already a confrontation of family-based issues, which you don't feel there's necessarily a positive outcome for before you even begin. And this is why beginning is the hardest thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's a very valid question, but that's the main reason why you don't want to engage the experiment. And the feeling that came over you, that emotion that came over you when I said it's going to be quite hard considering these things, that you could have, if you were alone, you could have cried about that, right? That's an indication that you know that already, and that's the thing that's stopping you. Allowing yourself to feel, wow, I might be confronting my whole family situation here. My family might reject me. They might put huge amounts of pressure on me, put huge amounts of pressure on my, beginning relationship, because you're just 4 months or 5 months in, is that right? Or 6 months? 1.5 years, sorry. Sorry, guys. 1.5 years into a relationship, and they might put pressure on that relationship and so forth. You don't know what they're going to do at this stage. It's unpredictable, right? Yeah. And that's why... So what happens then is the action that needs to be taken, which is the most logical action to do, which is at least go through the experiment, at least work out whether it's true or not. That action, so what Saussure is considering as an action, that actually flies in the face of a lot of opposition. Right? And the problem with such actions are that unless we can see a positive benefit for doing it, it's highly unlikely we will probably do it. Right? But one thing you must consider, Saussure, and it's pretty hard to consider this, is people who love you will demonstrate their love for you, whether they're atheists or not, will demonstrate their love for you by their treatment of you. And if your family did decide to treat you badly just because you're engaging in an experiment that they don't believe in, then that's an indication that perhaps you've never been loved by them. And that's the thing you're very afraid of discovering. Does that make sense? That's the thing you're afraid of discovering. And that's the fear of the discovery of that causes us to avoid taking what could be in the end action that benefits our entire life and also their lives. You know what I mean? And that's one main reason why we avoid those kind of actions. Yeah. So it's a big thing. I understand it's a big thing. And the reason why I also raised it for many of the others is many of you are still taking actions that is only to please the people around you and has nothing to do with what you know to be the truth or know to be loving or know to be in your own benefit. So many of you are choosing to do that. Now, for Saoirse, it's different because she's only just begun to sort of conceive the experiment. But you guys, many of you have had years to conceive the experiment or to try the experiment, and yet you're still doing that. So you're still making compromises between your relationship with people on earth and your relationship with God. Sooner or later, you will give up that process if you want to have a relationship with God. All right? So, like I've had to do that, Saoirse, that process. Very few members of my family talk to me anymore, and for different reasons. Yeah, some because they're upset because I told them the truth about something, some because they're upset about what I'm claiming, some because they're upset about what I'm doing, teaching other people what I'm teaching them, and so forth. And as a result, I barely see any family members now. And one of my sons is Tristan. He's sort of following God's way, but no one else in my family is at this point. And the amount of pressure that was brought to bear, quite significant. When I say significant, there was a point in time where all of my family refused to even see me or speak to me for a period of time. And that was pretty hard, to deal with. I had to deal with a lot of emotion going through that process. And it's sad. I find it's quite sad, really, that you have to do that, because if people were just open-minded, you could just experiment with anything, couldn't you? Anything that you feel might be loving, you could experiment with it, find out the answer, and away you go. And this is why the world itself isn't changing very rapidly, because there's so many external pressures on us to not experiment. So many. We can't make a mistake when we experiment. And we can't do something what they believe is wrong without being ridiculed or laughed at or even attacked or even abused, and sometimes violently. And this is why progress on the earth has been so slow. Because it's the family feelings that make our progress slow. We always go back to conforming. In the Paget messages, and I think it was Luke or John gave a message about why is it, I think the question that he raised at the beginning was, why is it that families believe what they believe? And at the beginning of the message he says, the reality is the majority of families have no idea why they believe what they believe, because they've just accepted the viewpoint of the family. So the Muslim begets a Muslim, the atheist begets an atheist, the Christian begets a Christian. And the reason why it usually remains that way for generation after generation is because everyone's too afraid to challenge the previous generation. Yeah. So it is a fear that needs to be addressed if you want to experiment with anything, let alone with the issue with God. Yeah. So does that help as to why?
Yes, thank you.
So it's fairly clear emotionally, you can feel that emotionally. So now it's just a matter of choosing to work through those emotions and still taking the action, or deciding not to take the action and put it off. And that's really up to yourself as to what you choose to do there. Yeah. Yeah. My suggestion would be to not put it off, but that's up to that's my suggestion. I've gone through the same experience in 2 lives. So I understand the pressures, and you know, unfortunately, the way our families are generally constructed, the pressures are fairly much unavoidable until they realise that you've done the right thing. And the sad thing of that is it's dependent upon you doing the right thing. So the trouble with an experiment is you don't know whether you're right or wrong, and you're not allowed to even be wrong without, you know, people attacking you for it, sort of thing. So I sort of feel like what would be really lovely is if we all allowed ourselves to make mistakes, and we all allowed everyone else to make mistakes. And if the mistake is just a simple thing as discovering a truth through a process of experimentation, then we should all be allowed to make those experiments, which God actually does allow us to do. It's just our families generally that don't. And society puts also extra pressure on as well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to ask about that? No, it's pretty clear. Good.